Today, I'd like to tell you about our sponsor, Swan Private. Now, you know from listening to this show that our money is broken. Fortunately, we have Bitcoin, a better money that will help us build a brighter future. But if you don't have a Bitcoin strategy and a trusted partner to help you execute that strategy, then you're probably going to fall behind. Now, I've known the Swan Bitcoin team for years. The Bitcoiners at Swan are mission-driven and have deep expertise and respect in the Bitcoin space. In my opinion, this is the team you want on your side. Today, I'd like to highlight Swan's Private Client Services division, which guides high net worth individuals and businesses around the world toward building and preserving wealth with Bitcoin. So visit swanprivate.com and learn how this concierge service gives you direct access to your dedicated Bitcoin advisor by phone, messaging, and email. Swan will guide you on complex areas such as self-custody, or you can choose to hold your Bitcoin through Swan with one of the largest US-regulated custodians. So, make your first purchase with Swan Private and get $100 of Bitcoin. Just tell them that I sent you. You know, an opportunity like this to build and preserve legacy-impacting wealth for your family and company will not likely be seen again in our lifetimes. Sign up at swanprivate.com today, mention Breedlove to your advisor, and get $100 in free Bitcoin when you make your first buy.
Mr. Dominic Frisby, welcome back to the What is Money Show.
Thanks very much, Robert. A pleasure to talk to you again.
Yeah, it's great to have you back. I wanted to just plug your Substack right here at the top of the show. It's really good stuff. You are writing excellently, as always. Called The Flying Frisbee, and you can find it at frisbee.substack.com. And today we're going to talk about one of your latest pieces, Money is Language.
Yeah, well, so I wrote this a couple of weeks ago, and I thought, yeah, Robert's going to like this. Mm-hmm. So that's why I pinged you a little message. And it was something that kind of, I suppose, came out of, it's a continuation of one of the conversations we had. I don't know, was it last year or the year before? I can't remember now, but whenever it was, we last spoke. And it's all about money as communication and money as language. And I guess it starts with, again, something we touched on before, but this is the cable, the first transatlantic cable that was laid between Europe, or it was actually laid from Ireland to New York. And I think it took them 3 or 4 goes before they were first successfully able to lay a cable. This would have been in the 1840s, 1850s, 1860s. And I think several people went bust in the process, and investors lost their shirt and so on. But and that's often the case with new technology. You know, it happened with the internet, it's happened many times with Bitcoin and altcoins and so on.
And this is laying cable on the ocean floor to connect Europe and North America, right? Telecommunication cable.
Exactly. The first telegraphic cable, I think it was called. And anyway, because at that time, it took 2 weeks or 10 days, maybe, if you wanted to get a message from mainland Britain or Ireland across to New York, it would take you 10 days. Can you imagine?
Crazy.
And this is like only 1850, so 170 years ago. But I think 1866 was the first time they got it right. And in July the 27th, 1866, Queen Victoria sent a message to the US president, President Johnson. And the message said, I love the way people spoke in those days. I'm going to read it now, but the message said, "The Queen congratulates the President on the successful completion of an undertaking which she hopes may serve as an additional bond of union between the United States and England." So very polite way of saying well done. And, and then Johnson replied, "To Her Majesty, the Queen of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland. The President of the United States acknowledges with profound gratification the receipt of Her Majesty's dispatch and cordially reciprocates the hope that the cable which now unites the Eastern and Western hemispheres may serve to strengthen and perpetuate peace and amity between the governments of England and the Republic of the United States." So really nice, long-winded way of speaking that they had. Now, before that message happened, it would, as I said, it would take 10 weeks to send a message. And now it was suddenly just a matter of minutes.
Right.
And so somebody came up with the slogan, 2 weeks to 2 minutes, which is a really kind of cool slogan for the time, 2 weeks to 2 minutes. And I bet they were all sort of thinking, this telegraphic cable fixes this.
It's funny
to think of another Bitcoin slogan, but yeah.
This is basically the world's first text message, I guess.
Yeah.
And it's so incredibly formal compared to what we do today. But it's interesting that this happened, then we got to the telephone, and then when texting became the thing on mobile, a lot of people thought that would never work. I mean, at least when it was becoming popular when I was young, there were a lot of older people I remember thinking that, oh, that's silly. My parents still don't send text, but I guess the point would be we started with text, then we got to telephone calls, and now we're back to this asynchronous text messaging thing.
It was the first text message. And now the funny thing is people are sending voice notes instead of text messages, which kind of do my head in, because they're like, no, I've got to listen for 2 minutes, however long the voice note is. But some people ramble on in their voice notes. But anyway, and so I think the very first messages that were sent were actually sent in Morse code. And this would be before the Queen's message between Johnson and the Queen. It was actually sent in Morse code. And you're probably too young for this, but the very first pages that you used to get, like doctors had them, you could only send numbers. And you would just you would have a pager on your belt, and you'd get a little vibration when you got a message, and it would just be the number of the person that you had to call.
Yeah.
So I would, in those days, I would get my agent would send me a message, call him, and then I would call him, and it would mean I had a voiceover, and I had to quickly go into town and do a voiceover. But anyway, but of course it went from Morse code to words very quickly, and transmission speeds improved rapidly. And then it was possible to send multiple messages at once, down the cable at once. And by the end of the 19th century, Britain, France, Germany, the US, they were all linked by cable. And, relations, political relations, commercial relations, personal relations, they were changed for all time with just a simple bit of wire. So It was an incredible transformative bit of tech. But here's the thing. Now, back then, the world was on a gold standard, obviously. UK had the dominant gold standard. And interestingly, there was a big argument going on at the time. They were trying to, the French were trying to get everyone else to adopt metric. America was in an argument about whether silver should be a money as well as gold. And the various European nations were also having the same argument. But because the pound was only gold and there was no real silver money, not much, we were on a gold standard, not a bimetallic standard. And the pound had been so successful, most countries ended up copying us. And so that's one of the ways that silver kind of got abandoned and left the monetary system. But the only reason we went pure bimetallic in the first place is because there'd been a massive run on silver when Isaac Newton, in like 1716 or wherever it was, and we had no silver. It had all gone to the continent. So Newton just went, okay, we'll just do it on gold. So it was kind of accidental. But anyway, but the point was, so gold and silver were money, but you can't send gold and silver down a cable, but you can send a promise. And within a fortnight of that first message between Queen Victoria and President Johnson, within a fortnight of that first message, that's what two parties who trusted each other did. And the first official exchange rate between the dollar and the pound was agreed. And it was published in the New York Times, August the 10th, 1866. And that is why to this day, the pound dollar exchange rate is called cable. It goes back to that very first cable. So you could send promises, but you couldn't send hard cash. Now, let me get a picture of a £20 note here. I've got a picture of a £20 note. I've got £20 note here in my pocket. You still see, I'll just hold it up to the camera so that people can see it. You still see there's a £20 note there. Mm. And just underneath the Bank of England, so you got the Bank of England sign there, and just underneath it says, I promise to pay the bearer the sum of £20.
Still says it. Wow.
So once upon a time, it would have been £20 of sterling silver. Right. Way back when, but it's now I promise to pay the bearer £20. So it's a promise. So this is actually a promise of nothing, because obviously it's fiat.
Right.
But does it have I promise to pay the bearer on a US dollar? Does it still have that or not?
It does not. The old dollars said redeemable for a certain weight of gold or silver, but that's not on new dollars. I don't believe. I think now it just says "In God We Trust." Federal Reserve notes, something like that.
All right. So anyway, that's that little tradition there. So
I can pull one out, actually. Let's see what the U.S. says. This note is legal tender for all debts, public and private. Federal Reserve note. In God We Trust. That's about it.
Okay.
So you got
the Fed in proof we trust.
And then, on the back, in God we trust, which, as we both know, is in Fed we trust.
Yeah. Okay. So, but the point is, you've got, and we'll come to Bitcoin in a second, but the point is, you've got two types of money. You've got the hard money, physical money, whether it's gold, silver, it could be shells or whale's teeth or whatever it is. Mm-hmm. And you've got promissory money.
Yes.
Now, and one is belief and the other is real. Mm-hmm. Now, Adam Smith actually said all money is a matter of belief, which is quite a profound quote when you think about it. And I suppose you've got to believe in the merits of gold in order to use gold as money. Mm-hmm. But anyway, we have been using promissory money ever since the dawn of civilization. The very first debts were, we spoke about this before, but clay balls with tokens, a cone for a sheep and a disc for a bushel of barley, whatever, was baked inside clay balls. And then people found it was quicker to inscribe the clay balls rather than just inscribe the clay with pictures of the tokens instead. And that's how the first system of handwriting developed. Mm-hmm. And then in China, I think man started recording his debts on bits of leather. Then they invented the printing press, and so we started. Promises are recorded and exchanged on computers around the world, and probably, I don't know, millions of promises, billions of promises are sent every second. I don't even know what the number. And they transfer as quick as words. But the point is that as money evolves, or as communication technology evolves, so does money. And in fact, as in the case of handwriting and something like Bitcoin, it might actually be that money is the spur to drive the communication technology forward. Sometimes one leads, it's chicken and egg. One right. Sometimes you get one, sometimes you get the other. Now, obviously, the beauty of Bitcoin is that it obviates the need for trusted parties altogether. You need trusted parties for promissory money to work, and Bitcoin obviates it. It's a money communication network backed by mathematical proof and shed loads of computer power and all the rest of it. And the trusted third party is the blockchain. So, and I always say to people, owning Bitcoin is like owning a share in this new communication technology. Right. And who wouldn't want to own shares in something with as much potential as that? And it's not like they're doing rollbacks. Right. It's not like they're issuing more shares in it.
Yeah, that's a great framing for it. Actually, I often say something similar, that imagine if you could have owned equity in HTTP or something like that, and all the companies that are built on top of that. That's sort of like what owning Bitcoin is.
Absolutely.
It's
owning a share in the protocol.
If I could, let me echo a couple of things back to you, just to try to summarize here. So this idea of really transformational communication technologies, they, like you said, we went from 2 weeks to 2 minutes. So if you just imagine how much faster information and knowledge are now moving between these two continents, and how much more coordinated human actions would become as a result, at least in the economy, right? So this was like the backbone for globalization, or the global division of labor, in a way, is we needed fast communications. Otherwise you can't do that.
Yeah.
And to your point, though, that promises on this tech are super high velocity, right? You can send them in 2 minutes. But the idea of sending, so that's deferred settlement, right? I'll pay you this or adjust the ledger that. But final settlement in something like gold, this technology didn't improve, right? You can't send gold over the telegraph wire. So we get into this problem where now the more useful money, the higher velocity money that's promissory, has this people problem, because now you have to trust people, basically, not to, to keep their promises, I guess we would say. And so, and I like to quote that all money is a matter of belief, but I guess the difference would be, in a promissory money, you're believing the individual making the promise or the group making the promise. And it's something like gold or Bitcoin, you're just believing what is, right? Like gold doesn't deviate from what it does. It always kind of does the same thing. Bitcoin always kind of does the same thing. So it gives you this firm foundation for belief, versus promissory money, which is notoriously unreliable.
Yeah, promises don't last. Gold does.
Right.
And Bitcoin probably will as well. Yeah. So, but if you're sending in promises, you need good, especially important promises, you need good communication tools. And so then you could take that one stage further and go, what is money but a form of communication? Okay. And so one of my golden rules with politicians, I try not to listen to them, but on the rare occasions that I'm forced to, I always go, look at what they do, not at what they say. So you'll have, I don't know, politician A giving it the big one about world peace or something, and then he'll go and bomb a country. Or politician B giving it the big one about climate change, and then he gets on his private jet and flies off to Davos, or whatever the thing is. And you have to say, what we do says more about us than what we say. But what we do with our money says even more about us than what we do and what we say, if you like. Or it doesn't necessarily say more, but it tells a story in itself. And it's not just so like if I was a bot and I had access to all Robert Breedlove's spending habits, and I knew that in any week he spends this much on gym kit and this much on t-shirts and this much on booze and this much on makeup, I could pretty quickly get to know exactly what kind of a guy you are.
Yeah.
And I'm not suggesting you do spend money on all those things, but you take my point.
Everything except makeup.
You mean that complexion's natural? And but money doesn't just communicate about us. It serves a secondary function, is that how we spend money communicates value to the entire economy. So between buyer and seller, what's the price of this thing? What is its value? And that answer is constantly being sent and received, digested, acted upon. It changes slightly. And so does the economy constantly, but also incrementally, gradually develop with each new signal. It's amazingly complex power at work here. And yet there's this constant never-ending evolution and development. And ultimately it's the how, why, and what of what needs producing, where and when. That's the message that's being communicated. So money in itself then is like a language.
Yes.
And if you look at the history of fiat money, let's say that fiat money started it didn't, but let's just say for the sake of argument, it started in 1914 when the British, French and Germans abandoned the gold standard to print the money to pay for World War I. Or we could say that it started in 1971, whenever, it doesn't matter. Nobody is in charge of fiat money. Central banker is to an extent, but he can't control all the technological, all the fintech that's going on and all the evolutions. And I don't believe our fiat system, it was ever planned. It's just constantly evolved.
Yes.
With billions of people contributing in their own different ways, simply by using it.
Yeah.
And buying it and selling it, and what you do with our money. And it's the actions of I don't believe the architects of fiat money even realize that when a bank creates money, when a bank issues debt, money gets created.
Right.
I don't think they realize that, but they just adopted fiat money just to get out of a tight fiscal spot. Extenuating circumstances at the time. There's a war to fight, and it's constantly evolved ever since. With you and I have each evolved it just by buying and sending stuff. But somebody who's developed some clever little widget whereby you can just tap and go with your credit card or whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
These are all ways that have evolved the fiat money system. But it wasn't planned. There was a decision taken, and various decisions have been taken, but it was still, the development was still in many ways organic, but it was an organic development from unsound foundations. Let's put it like that. And similarly, nobody planned the language that we speak today. Mm-hmm. It's very hard to plan and regulate a language, and it's many have tried over the years to regulate the language they speak, and they still do today. If you use the wrong words, you can get cancelled very easily. And but even so, language is very hard to plan and regulate, and you might be banned from using certain words, but you can bet your bottom dollar that people are using those words.
In private.
When they're in private. Exactly. Yeah. So anyway, language has constantly evolved and developed according to the use and the needs of billions of people. And again, just by you and I having this conversation now, we are evolving the language in a minuscule way, in the same way that if you and I were sending each other money, we'd be evolving the economy in a way. Now, the English that we speak today, it's unrecognizable from the English of Chaucer, pretty unrecognizable from Shakespeare. It's not that similar to the language of Dickens. There are probably fewer words than there were, certainly than Shakespeare had. We have much smaller vocabularies than Shakespeare did. There are fewer tenses. Grammar's much simpler. I know there were all sorts of efforts taken with the Americanization of English. The reason you have your spelling is somebody was just trying to simplify spelling and make English more phonetic and get rid of extraneous vowels. So we'll spell colour COLOUR, and you'll spell it COLOR, because somebody somewhere deemed that the U was inefficient and decided to get rid of it.
Yeah.
This is back in the late 1900s, I think the late 1800s, I think this. But even though English is smaller than it was and different to what it was, it's now far more widely spoken than it ever was with Chaucer, Dickens, or Shakespeare.
Right.
It's, the network has grown.
Yes.
Now, there's all sorts of reasons why the network has grown. Probably the main reason is the empire, British Empire, all over the world. But then you could say, well, why hasn't Spanish got the same reach? And it's probably because the Spanish Empire was centered around South America and Portuguese, whereas English was much more higgledy-piggledy all over the place.
Right.
And even though America wasn't part of the English Empire, the British Empire, you still spoke English. After you kicked us out. Bad decision, by the way.
Let me, if I could pause here, just to echo a couple things back. So the point's well taken, and this is age-old wisdom that talk is cheap, but actions are not. We always hear actions speak louder than words. But then this idea of what we do with our money, right? How we spend it, or where we invest it, or what we save in. I agree with you that this is perhaps even louder than action itself, because, a single investment decision, especially if it's a large sum of money, could represent many years of actions, right? In one decision. If you're putting whatever the number is, $100,000, $1 million at risk, presumably that took you a long time, a lot of actions to accumulate that much money that you're then investing with one decision. So it's almost like an amplified signal. of action in a way. And then the other point that I think is key here is that, so again, talk is cheap because it's inexpensive, right? We can just produce words almost ad infinitum, but to produce, unless you're the central bank,
at no cost to ourselves.
Yes.
We can produce words at no cost to ourselves.
Yes. And unless you're the central bank, you cannot do that with money.
Yeah.
So to the extent money is rooted in energy, right, that there's a cost necessary, that is the extent to which it gives you an honest signal, I think. And we could frame this up in price signals as well, right? How fiat money destroys price signals in the economy. And then finally, I love this connection you're making between really language just being an open source technology, ultimately, right? English is an open source tech. That's what it is. People use it. If it's useful, if they don't, they discard it. Really hard to regulate because it's, damn near unbannable. I don't know how you could ban English. I can't imagine a world where that could succeed. And I think that's a good way to look at Bitcoin, is that it's really just text, so it's, and it's open source. So it's kind of similar to English and language in a lot of ways.
Now, it's quite interesting because there was a time, there's a big argument that's been going on for hundreds of years about which weights and measures we should use, whether we should use pounds and inches and yards and miles, or whether we should use and pints, or whether we should use liters and meters and kilometers and kilograms and all the rest of it. And at the same time, and this all came out of post-revolutionary France, where they were trying to they were trying to eradicate their history, basically. Mm-hmm. And so they had these new measures. And they also introduced, they tried to make the time go metric as well. So they were trying to do like 10-hour weeks and 10-hour days and 10-day weeks and all this. And that didn't succeed. But another thing that came about a bit later, but it was all part of the same movement, whereas, so you tend to see with imperial measures, or you call them English measures, don't you? Pounds and inches and all this.
We don't even call them. We just call it the standard system, I think. Metric system and standard system. Yeah.
Okay, so the standard system. And
which
the
is
French
decidedly non-standard worldwide, by the way. It's very arrogant of us to call it that.
Actually, it's not.
Okay.
Because yours is the most organic system. And it's the system, like, the inch, for example, is a thumb pressed down. A yard is a pace. A pint is the amount you have to drink to satisfy your thirst. A stone is the amount that you can comfortably carry without straining yourself. A pound is the amount you can carry in your hand comfortably. A furlong is the distance you can sprint for. There, a fathom is your arms. They're all really, really organic.
I didn't know that. Wow.
It's really organic. And most cultures around the world arrived at similar measurements. Like, for example, the Japanese foot is a tiny bit smaller than the Western foot. That's because the average Japanese foot is slightly average
smaller.
Japanese person's foot so it's all really organic. And the hand is the best way of measuring up a wall or the height of an animal or whatever. So they're really organic. And it was a very much a bottom-up development, what happened with weights and measures. And then the metric system was very much top-down planned.
Right.
And it has very little, like, how long is a meter? If you don't have a measurement that you can measure a meter with, it's hard to actually measure what a meter is. But you can measure a yard because it's a pace, or it's, three average size feet with a boot on. So it's actually quite easy to make measurements when you don't have some kind of measuring device. So it's very organic, and it's all devised bottom up around the human body. And so, like I say, the metric is a top down. And as part of this movement, way back when, they tried to devise an international language called Esperanto. And they all said, look, I've devised this language. It's much better than English because the grammar's simpler and and there are fewer words and there's no stupid tenses and all these reasons. It probably is academically a better language. I don't speak it, but it probably is academically a better language than English. But they try to say, get everyone to speak Esperanto. And everyone's like, well, I speak English. What's wrong with English? I'm not going to change my language. It's too much effort. It's too much. So one's a sort of top-down plan thing, and another's a bottom-up. Anyway, now we come to language. I've just got to get some stats off my computer. But if you look at native speakers around the world, oh God, I can't remember my password. Hang on a minute.
I'll throw out
here we go. Right. So if you look at,
sorry, while you're looking that up, I'm just reminded of this quote that in theory, there's no difference between theory and practice, but in practice there is. So all of this top-down theorizing that Esperanto is better or the metric system is better, it just quite often isn't better than the bottom-up system, right? The bottom-up system emerges the way it does for a reason. And usually that's because it satisfies, some very basic things like you just described.
Yeah, and it develops slowly over time according to the needs and uses of billions of people.
Right.
And I'm afraid that's what's happened with Bitcoin. We got the top-down planner in Satoshi, but pretty early on, he solved his little problem of doubles, or his big problem of double spending. And once he solved that, he said, right, this is the answer, the blockchain, but now I'm putting it out open source. I've got my stash of coins that I've mined. And now here we go, open source. And it's an open source community that's developed it. And now, you see the work that's going, Jack Mallor and whoever it is, the stuff they're doing, developing it further and further. I don't even think any of Satoshi's original code exists anymore. If I'm right in saying that, I might be very little of it. I gather he wasn't even a particularly good coder.
Yeah, I don't know. I know there's elements of Bitcoin that were kind of set in stone from the beginning, like the 21 million hard cap, but I don't know if the actual code and language that he used to solidify that is the same code or not. I can't speak to that.
I don't know. Somebody will know, but and is somebody who understands code.
Now I'd like to tell you about a great new Bitcoin show on the scene that you've got to check out. Brought to you by Swan Studios and Bitcoin Magazine, this show is Hard Money with Natalie Brunell. Natalie is an Emmy-nominated journalist bringing unparalleled experience to the Bitcoin media scene. And personally, Natalie is one of my favorite voices in the Bitcoin space. Each week on Hard Money, you'll get the top headlines of the week with analysis you won't find anywhere else. Hard-hitting interviews with amazing guests like myself and other top minds in the Bitcoin space. And the show will take you directly into the lives being changed by Bitcoin all over the world. Check out Hard Money at swan.com/hardmoney. Today, I want to tell you about our sponsor, Crowd Health. So, how does health insurance work? You send an egregious amount of money to an insurance company. They hold it in a pool of depreciating fiat currency. Then, when you have a large health event, you have to pay them even more via your deductible. And then you hope they will cover your bill. And in fact, 1 in 6 bills are denied by healthcare.gov plans. It's time to take control of your own healthcare bills. I'd like to introduce you to Crowd Health. It's a decentralization of healthcare using Bitcoin as an alternative to health insurance. Instead of sending fiat currency to a big corporation, you send that money to an account controlled by you, a portion of which is converted into Bitcoin. Then, if you have a big health event, you have a community of Bitcoiners that will use the money in their accounts to help you out. To get more details, go to joincrowdhealth.com/Breedlove, where you can find the promo code for $99 a month for 6 months.
But anyways, the problem is Bitcoin has happened bottom up organically in the same way that weights and measures, in the same way that language, in the same way that money has. If you look at English, English has 373 million people who speak English as a first language. Okay, 373 million. Mandarin has 3 times as many. Actually, a bit less. It's 900 and something million. Call it a billion. So it's a bit less than 3 times as many. speak Mandarin as a first language. But if you look at the total number of people that speak English, it's 1.5 billion. I can't believe it's not higher, but anyway, 1.5 billion. Whereas Mandarin is only 1.1 billion. So English has something like 1 billion people who speak it as a second language. Now, then, you know, it's the dominant linguistic network. Let's put it like that. And there might come a time when everyone in the world has some English. And I can't see Mandarin becoming superseding English because it would require too many people learning it. And, you know, it's centralized in China. And the other thing I forgot to say is English became disparate because of the empire. But the other sort of reason why it's a good language is that it's part Latin, part Germanic. So with most European languages, they'll either be Germanic or Latin, whereas English is higgledy-piggledy. And because it's had this global language, we've just absorbed loads of words from other languages. From French, I can think of hundreds of French phrases that are English now, and there's loads of Indian terms, Hindi. So it you know, it absorbs stuff.
Yes.
Now, other languages fade away. We've got, you know, for example, Cornish was a region in the southwest of England. It's all but died. Few people speak Welsh or Gaelic. The local dialects of France, Italy, they're all disappearing. I can imagine, I don't even know what they are, but there's probably loads of African languages, Asian languages, indigenous American languages that are on the way out if they haven't already gone. And English is, for most part, replacing them. But it's not the same English that Chaucer and Dickens and Shakespeare spoke. It's a completely different English. But it could become, in fact, it's almost certain to become the default language of the world. I would say it's almost inevitable. Mind you, the French thought the same thing 100 years ago. It was thought French was the language of diplomacy. These are the same guys who were trying to impose metric and Esperanto on everyone. But it was assumed that French would be the international language, and it nearly was. The French Empire was pretty big. And it's probably America that's resulted in English being the language and not French. Anyway,
that's interesting, right? A rebel from England then actually led to English becoming the dominant linguistic network. I just want to also throw in here, I think there would be network effects too. So the bigger and more successful the linguistic network, the more likely it is to win. Because there's like clearly parents, if there's 1 billion-ish people, you said, with English as their second language, it's very likely their kids are probably going to take English as a first or second language too, right? So the most successful linguistic network tends to stay successful and become more successful.
Yeah. And you know, like VHS beat Betamax. But I think most people tell me that Betamax was better than VHS. You know, I always thought mini disc was a better technology than CD, but CD beat mini disc because the more users, whatever, so it doesn't necessarily have to be the best language in order to become the biggest one.
Right.
Just has to have the most users. And I'm not saying that English is better than whatever. And you know, this is despite having a third as many native speakers as Mandarin. And it's certainly not going to happen. You know, Gaelic's not going to become the international language, or Neapolitan or Swahili or whatever it is. It's going to be English unless something else for some reason comes along. And by the way, one of the reasons that here in Britain, we're having such a problem, I don't know if you've seen this on the American news, but we're having a huge problem with illegal immigration and people trafficking and people getting these boats across the channel and coming across the water in the storms, you know, young men from the Middle East and Africa and stuff. And nobody can understand is why they don't stop in Europe. Why does so much immigration people want to come to England? The reason is most of them have some English. They don't have any French or any German. They've just got a little bit of English. And they think, well, I'll come to England because that's, at least I've got some of the language. Anyway, so if we scoop back round to money now and we go, how many different monies have there been in history? You know, shells, whale's teeth, metals, paper, cigarettes. I read that they use mackerel packs in prisons. Have you heard that? They trade mackerel. Cognac, Zimbabwe dollars, Reichsmarks, denarii, farthings, shillings, shit coins. Most monies have died. And most of those which haven't yet died will die. And it's pretty much only gold and maybe silver goes on. And that's all to do with gold's permanence and its immutability and all the rest of it. But as I say, with transatlantic cables, you can't send gold over the internet. Saylor famously said that you can't send gold down the internet, but you can send golden promises between trusted third parties. But then you're back into promissory money again.
Right.
Now, at the moment, the US dollar is the global reserve currency. And you can send the US dollar over the internet, but it's hard for people who aren't American to get a US dollar bank account. Foreign exchange fees are expensive. Money transfers can take several days sometimes. There are billions around the world, as we know, who are still unbanked. So they can't get any kind of bank account, let alone a US dollar one. So the US dollar is a national currency that is used internationally.
Right.
And a country, if it wanted to, and there are many that do, could use the US dollar as their national currency. But at the same time, if you do that, you're importing US monetary policy.
Right.
And so you're subjecting yourself to the US political whims, which is why most countries tend to issue their own currencies, because they've got their own political agenda.
Which is a nice way of saying you're basically making yourself vulnerable to US taxation via inflation.
It's exactly what you're doing. I put it more politely, but So even though it's international, it's still a national currency, and it's limited by its national borders and by its politics. And the same goes for any national currency. But language is not limited by national borders, or at least English isn't. So I'm going to suggest, and this is the point of today's thing, I'm going to suggest that the US dollar is what French was 100 years ago, 120 years ago. You thought it was the international language, it was the official language of diplomacy, but its scalability is limited. And if only there was an apolitical, borderless currency for the borderless medium that is the internet, then that really would be scalable in a way that no national currency is. And it would have to be a currency that's evolved organically and is constantly growing. Now, the Bitcoin price may be down 50% on what it was this time last year, give or take, whatever date this gets published on. But the network has grown 20% over the same time. You don't need a bank account to start using Bitcoin. You only need a phone with an internet connection. And we're not far off the point where anyone in the world who wants a smartphone has one. I went to the homeless charity the other day. I walked past it where they all queue in the morning to get their breakfast, and they're all sat outside, all the homeless people sat outside queuing for their breakfast on the ground, all playing on the're mobile phones. All the homeless have got smartphones. And and I don't know what the latest numbers are, but we're not far off the point where anyone in the world who wants a smartphone has one. I imagine we're about 1 billion people away from that.
Right.
I'm guessing. So here's the thing. The US dollar is what French was. But if money is language, then Bitcoin is English. That's the line. It has the potential to scale in a way that no other currency has. So yeah, that's the main point. I've got a little anecdote I'll tell you in a sec, but that's my main argument.
I really like it. It's so funny, I had been using this line where to try and ban Bitcoin is as effective as trying to ban English, something like that. But I like how you've unpacked it a lot here. And the only other thing I would throw in is that this global apolitical borderless money for the borderless internet. The other thing that it's very significant to its value proposition is the lack of counterparty risk in holding something like Bitcoin. And as we've seen over the past 2 years, as you get more abuse and more oppression from counterparties, whether it's the seizure of funds from the Canadian Freedom Convoy protest, or even the seizure of foreign central bank reserves by the SWIFT network, basically from the Russian central bank. I mean, I think all of these occasions create more pressure to adopt something like Bitcoin that's free of counterparty risk, or physical gold. I guess physical gold too is the other, non-counterparty monetary option, but of course it's much less practical since you can't send it over the internet.
Yeah. And if we're sending golden promises, but I'm holding the gold that I promised to pay you, and then you're a naughty boy and you go and invade another country, well, I'm not giving you the gold.
That's right. Yeah. He who holds the gold makes all the rules.
Yeah. Yeah. The whole financial repression, the whole financial warfare that has been waged on Russia, I can't say I blame American policymakers, European policymakers for doing that. I probably would have done the same had I been in their position. But I think it's incredible, the weaponization of money. Mm-hmm. It's been quite something to behold, and I imagine China's looking at that and going, "Okay, we still got however many trillion US dollars here.
Right?
Let's get rid of them.
Yes,
before we invade Taiwan. Let's just get rid of these and convert them into gold or whatever."
Yes,
but so I think that has probably delayed the inevitable invasion of Taiwan, which is a good thing, but it is also longer term weakened the US dollar, because it's made it apparent to America's enemies how much by using their money you are playing into American hands. And right. There's an amazing stat. I don't know if you know this, but what's the best performing currency this year?
I have no idea.
Russian ruble.
Ah, okay.
You'd think it's the US dollar. I mean, there's bound to be some, the Chilean peso or something, some obscure one has probably done better. But you'd think it was the US dollar, which has been very strong this year, but the Russian ruble has outperformed it. And it's all because, the US is the money of petrol, gas, as you call it, but Russia is the money of natural gas. And it started demanding rubles. You want to buy its natural gas, you've got to buy its rubles. And that's, I guess that's the reason for it. But it's not a statistic you hear that often. It's very telling.
Yeah, that's interesting. The idea of requiring a certain denomination for energy contracts, whether it's oil or natural gas, that's a way to actually bolster reservation demand for your currency and give it that uplift in terms of purchasing power. That's what the US did too, right? We went off the gold standard and then we pegged it to black gold. So
exactly, and your military, and I read that Indonesia is the world's largest coal exporter, and so if I was the Indonesian government, I'd start demanding payment in rupiahs.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, it gets back to that whole notion of money as energy, basically, right? And so when you peg it to energy by requiring payments to be made in your currency to buy energy, it's good for the currency network.
Yeah. The fundamental problem with money, as it now is, in my opinion, is the fact that one body in society has the power to create that money at no cost to itself.
Yes.
In other words, without expending any energy.
Yeah.
And while one body in society has that power, society is inevitably going to be disproportionately weighted in favor of that body.
Yes.
And so that really is an argument for, independent money, and Bitcoin fixes this and all the rest of it. Let me tell you a little story about that. I just a little historical anecdote that I stumbled across. So there was an American journalist in the late 19th century called Nellie Bly. And if you Google pictures of her, she was hot. She was really beautiful, young lady. And she went on a trip around the world in 72 days. And she did it because she'd read Jules Verne's Around the World in 80 Days, and she liked Phileas Fogg, and she wanted it was like, journalists do similar things now. A journalist will go 6 months surviving on Bitcoin or something as an experiment, whatever. And so when she went around the world, she took pounds because at the time she was American, but she took pounds because pound was the internationally recognized currency at the time. But she also brought some dollars with her to, as she put it, as a test to see if American money was known outside of America. So she then went east from New York, across the Atlantic, and she didn't see, and through Europe, and she didn't see, so the story goes, she didn't see American money until she got to Sri Lanka, Colombo, where $20 gold pieces were used as jewelry. And they actually accepted her dollars, but only at a 60% discount. Now, I don't see how that's true, because if the money was gold, it was gold. But anyway, that's the story. It was a 60% discount. You can go around the world, and it's still a bit of an ask to get people to accept Bitcoin in the physical world. But that's not what it's for. It's money for the internet. It's cash for the internet, money for the internet. And how scalable is the internet? How scalable is money for the internet?
Right. No, dead on. I mean, I often have described Bitcoin as just an extension of the internet, really. We just have this open source protocol for moving value sitting on the open source protocol stack for moving information. And yeah, how scalable is that? I mean, it's a limitless bottom up network. It can go as far as our ingenuity can take it.
Yeah. My friend Charlie Morris, who writes, he used to be a fund manager for HSBC, and he's a real sort of traditional city gent. And he got into Bitcoin about, 2015 or something. And he writes a newsletter called Byte Tree. But he's now convinced that Bitcoin is an institutional asset, and it's been de-risked, and there's less risk in buying Bitcoin now at $30,000 than there was buying it 3 years ago at $3,000, even though it's 10 times higher. He just thinks it's a proven institutional asset now, and it will make up more and more a part of institutional portfolios around the world. He's absolutely committed, and you get him. I mean, I love talking about Bitcoin, but you get him on this subject and you're like, all right, Charlie, stop, give it a rest. But he's
sounds like a great guest for the show.
Oh yeah, with pleasure. You should welcome him on. I'll introduce you.
This is a really cool piece, Dominic. People often analogize money to language, but I think you've taken the analogy kind of a step further and really looked at the fundamental characteristics that language has, that money also has, and the overlap between the two. And I think there's a lot to be learned from the success of English across the world and what the money of the internet could look like going into the future. Especially so when you consider all of the oppression and counterparty risk and, broken promises, let's say, occurring worldwide. In my mind, at least, this just highlights the need for something that's not built on promises, right? Something that's built on a firm foundation like Bitcoin.
Yeah, I think, we talked about the two types of people. You've got the people who are operating at grassroots, who do whatever they're doing, and then you've got the top-down planners. And there's often this clash between the two, and the planner wants one thing and the other guy wants something else. I think we're inevitably going to have some kind of international cryptocurrency, it's going to be IMF coin or something imposed on us, and we're going to be told how much better it is than Bitcoin, and we have to use it for this, that, and the other. And we're not at that point yet, but that's the battle that Bitcoin's going to have.
Yeah, I agree with that. What do you think that will be? I've thought about this a little bit, that there will be some type of economic crisis, and then they'll insert IMF coin as the solution to whatever the crisis is, and that's how they'll force adoption. Or how do you If you had to speculate on how that would happen, what do you think?
Well, I've been, I think I've been, as a sort of Austrian purist, if you like, waiting for the crash and then the adoption of sound money when everything goes to zero. And I think actually real life isn't nearly as clear cut as we like to see it when we're writing books or whatever. And so I just think there's just going to be, I rather than a sort of clean incident, I think it's just going to be a sort of muddle through. And, I'm glad we've mostly got rid of COVID regulations, at least we have in the UK. You don't seem to have elsewhere. My mum lives in America, and she came back from America for a few weeks, and she's like wearing a mask all the time and doing it. And I'm like, why are you still wearing a mask? But that's, obviously what they're doing where she is. But all that nearly happened with COVID. And I think if we'd had another year of it, it might well have happened. But for whatever reason, thank God that didn't happen. And a lot of that is to the credit of a guy called Steve Baker, who's a backbench MP big into Austrian economics. He's a little known backbench MP, but he basically is really good at organizing all the MPs. And he basically said when Boris Johnson was going to lock down again in December, he basically said, Boris, if you lock down again, when Omicron came along, he said, if you lock down again, we're all putting a vote of no confidence in you. And so he forced Boris to abandon that lockdown. Wow. And so England sort of, like we always do, we stumbled into being the freest country. We didn't do it by planning. We just sort of tripped into it. But anyway, suddenly Britain didn't lock down and everywhere else did. Yeah. And our rates were no different to anyone else's. And so gradually it seeps. When one country does it, it seeps, and it's gradually seeped. Like I went skiing in March in France, and they were arresting people for not wearing masks in the bloody cable car. And you're like, we're up a mountain, and you can't get it up. Anyway,
psychotic. Wow.
But it's that's that sort of accidental bit of freedom has sort of spread everywhere else, and that's saved for the time being from IMF coin. But I do think there's a dynamic at play in America, and to a certain extent, like in 2008, the narrative was we need to fight deflation by their definition. And that's why we got QE and zero interest rates and money printing and all the rest of it, because they were scared of deflation. Now they seem to be genuinely scared of inflation by their definition. We can't hide it any longer. It's showing up in what do you call it? Consumer CPI. CPI. Yep. Yeah. And even Biden said, my number one priority is inflation. Now, you tend to take what politicians say as hot air, but I think there's a very different thing now in play. Is the Federal Reserve actually wants stock prices lower, and it wants them lower this year because next year there's going to be an election to fight again. But this is the second year of a presidential cycle. It wants them lower. It wants crypto down. It wants house prices down a little bit, because then money conditions tighten, everyone's a bit more prudent, you lose the sort of speculative mania that comes with some inflations, and everyone adopts a much more deflationary mindset, deflationary psychology prevails. And that means they won't have to put up interest rates by nearly as much. So I think it's important to remember that at the moment, the Fed isn't protecting assets in a way that it was 12 years ago. But but it's interesting to know how much pain, this S&P's rebounding a bit. I don't know if it turns lower here or carries on going up. I'm not sure. I buy both arguments. But if it if there's real pain, then it'll start printing again. And I sort of think this Russia-Ukraine crisis, that looked like it was the beginning of World War III, but I think it's just going to be one of these weird conflicts that goes on and on and on. And the rest of the world stops caring about it, and nobody really wins. And so I don't know if we're going to get this sort of mega crisis that IMF coin could come out of it, but I just think it's sort of somehow going to happen, by accident, and it'll probably be imposed on because we're definitely going into an environment of deglobalization, because nobody trusts each other anymore in the way that they did 4 or 5 years ago. And maybe they'll see IMF coin as a way of preventing deglobalization. I don't really know, but I know one way or another it's coming, whether by financial crash or not, I'm not sure.
Yeah, I mean, yes, agreed. The uncertainty is so high, so we really don't know which way it could go, but it does seem like it's going to be painful no matter what, because ultimately there's a reckoning that has to take place, and that is, what is it, 350% global debt to GDP, something like that. I mean, that has to be reconciled at some point. You can't just inflate that away.
I'm not sure, Robert. I've been waiting 20 years for the reconciliation, for the day of reckoning, and you know, I've only got one life.
Well, I don't want to catch myself using the famous last words. This time it's different, but it seems like the existence of Bitcoin does make things different. Like
I would agree with that.
You kind of could hide behind the best of the worst fiat currencies, right? Like if everyone thought the dollar was the greatest thing ever, but the dollar is still inflating, it makes that dilution of purchasing power largely invisible when you're denominating in other currencies that are also being diluted. But now with something like Bitcoin, it's kind of a truthful barometer to all the bullshit, if you will, because the more they print globally, you're just going to see this Bitcoin price continue to go up, I think. But who knows?
I've been
all that with a grain of salt.
I've been impressed by the way that Bitcoin's held at 29,000. 28, 29, whatever the number is. You know, it could easily have gone a lot lower, and it didn't. And I think that's good.
Yeah, it is good. I am sitting on a few dollars, hoping it does go down a little lower, though. Dominic, this is awesome. Average. I will. I'm going to link this Money as Language piece in the show notes. Do you want to let my audience know where they can find out more about you or your work?
Yeah, I started this Substack channel thing by accident in about February of this year. And it's just been one of these things. Sometimes you work really hard at something and nobody's interested. And this is just one of those things that just seems to have really caught on. And it's already one of the top 20 finance Substacks. And a lot of the time I'm just regurgitating material that I was producing elsewhere, but it's just done really well. It's really popular. And I wrote that piece for it. And I don't only write about Bitcoin, I write about, you know, metals and mining and all sorts of other things as well. But please sign up, frisby.substack.com. I called it originally the Flying Frisbee, but I think I'm going to change the name to Make Money and Stick It to the Man, because I think that's a better title.
That's much more poignant.
Yeah.
Dominic, it's been a pleasure as always. Love talking to you. And I look forward to doing it again soon.
Yeah, me too, Robert. I'm actually coming through the States in October.
Okay.
So if you're not in Hawaii, then I'm going to New Orleans. I'm going to see someone in Mississippi. I'm going to see someone else in California. But if you're anywhere around, I'll stop by and we're going to have a steak and a beer.
Yeah, I'd love that. I'll likely will be in Nashville around that time. So
I'd love to go to Nashville. I've never been, and I really want to go.
Nashville's a blast, and it's right in that neighborhood of Louisiana.
I saw a great film. Yeah, I saw a great film last night called it's called something like "What Is a Woman" or something like that, by this dude from Nashville who just it's all to do with the trans argument, but he just goes around America asking people what a woman is. Nobody can tell him.
What a crazy world we live in.
Yeah, I'd really recommend that film if anyone hasn't seen it.
I will check it out. Okay, well, thanks so much.
All right, man. I'll see you soon.
See you soon.